So the Chapter 7 overview of markets, organizations, and work um, is pretty technical. And the questions for this chapter are: how do social factors impact markets? Why are organizations important for social and economic life? What is the relationship between organizations and their environment? How are jobs structured? And what makes a good job? Question one, of course, how do social factors impact? Through the creation and functioning of markets. Markets, of course, are found in places where buyers and sellers and producers engage in the exchange of commodities and services. So it's not just things, but it can be things that you can do for somebody. They provide a vast majority of goods and services all over the world. And of course, they affect almost every arena of social life today. Just witness what happened with the shutdown of businesses with COVID and how it affected not only the economic markets, but markets locally and regionally and nationally. They involve central planning. They're employed in socialist economies in Eastern Europe. Um, Capitalism, on the other hand, is a different issue. It's characterized by economic systems based on private property and market exchange. It's what we live in instead of a more socialist economy. And of course, there's socialism, which is found in economic systems where government owns property and controls production. So you can compare and contrast classical economics. Market implies exchange of goods and services between buyers and sellers through random one-shot exchanges and a rational choice perspective. The sociological definition, of course, is repeated interactions that buyers and sellers and producers execute through formal and informal rules. There's a shared understanding with these markets. You give, I give. Question two is, what are the organizations important for social and economic life? Organizations in the modern world include groups engaged in specific activities with identifiable purposes or goals that endure with enduring form of association. So like the fuel system to run your car, or the food system to get your food. There's many organizational types. They're not all the same, but organizational persistence is there. Jobs and Wozniak at Apple is a good example of how pervasive and persistent that industry is. There's a downside to bureaucracies. Max Weber, back in the early 1900s, wrote about the theories of bureaucracy. They're supposed to make things predictable. So the existence of formal procedures and rules ensure consistency, accountability, and serve as a hallmark of bureaucracy. The central features include hierarchical organization, like in the military or educational system, written rules that people all follow, and full-time salary decision-making officers that whose primary job is to make sure the system works properly. Other downsides include a garbage can model of decision-making, um, which includes all the wants and needs of those involved in the decision-making process, whether they're necessary or not. It may result in less than any single participant envisions. There's loose coupling, which involves attempts to decentralize decision-making to allow for emergence of multiple approaches. So dealing with the pandemic has led to decentralized decision-making, different states doing whatever it takes to manage their state. It can provide flexibility to maneuver within more local environmental concerns, such as the pandemic. But it may be a barrier to some institutional goals. That is what happens as a rule of thumb across the United States. Question 3 is, what is the relationship between organizations and their environment? Organizations and their environment include how can organization structures help or hurt the chances for survival. Think about this as from an evolutionary perspective. Good match to initial environment and subsequent structural inertia, that is movement. Identification and fulfillment of a niche for their services or products, which is important. And of course, identification and persuasion of potential donors. So putting something in an area that's not needed or necessary is going to lead to it not being very successful. But talking people into the potential to be involved in it is important. Organizational isomorphism, that is the ability to change. Organizations in the same field tend to become increasingly similar to each other over time. So how many different types of pizza can you have? In that industry, there's a sort of a standard, and they all start to look like each other. There's coercive isomorphism, like Americans with Disabilities compliance. There's normative isomorphism, like expectations of people the organization serves. And there's mimetic or isomorphism, which is imitating parts of an organization's visible environment. Question 4 is, how are jobs structured? There is a division of labor in modern societies that is far different than in primitive societies. Division of labor means, for example, hunter and gatherers or agrarian societies, it was simple divisions. You hunt, I gather. Childcare. Contemporary societies are very complex. They include increasing specialization. That started occurring in the mid-19th century and to this present day. It grew within the Industrial Revolution. For example, Henry Ford, with his first production lines for automobiles, was a good example of how divisions of labor occurred and led to increased industry and production, and supported the development of wealth, more education and training, and a variety of jobs in the modern economy. So the problem now is, how many different jobs could a person engage in over a lifetime? And of course, the labor process has shown that cooperation between workers is super important. It's led to the development of labor unions and other labor phenomenon. Braverman looked at a more scientific management approach, or de-skilling. The labor process also has been looked at in the 1960s. Wright and Dreyer saw job patterns of growth in skill categories. By the 1990s, it was more of a mixed pattern. They became a jack of all trades by the 1990s. Increasingly, worker cooperation and interchangeable and interconnected jobs are very important. Question 5, what makes a good job? Good jobs, bad jobs, no jobs work in America. Work satisfaction is really important, and it's based on the rate of pay. That helps. The amount of autonomy and the ability to work independently. Your status within the job. The amount of trust people put in you. The level of skills and credentials that you have. And your job security. Comparing work in America to other similar countries, capitalist market economies are different because of the role of unions, the kind and amount of government law or regulations that are involved. In free market economies, free markets decide more of how work is done and organized. Fewer government regulations of employment and relatively weak labor movements. The current administration, Trump administration, is more free market economies. So you can kind of divide capitalist markets into more democratic and free market economies into more Republican. It's a simple way of looking at it. There's lean production, which is continual identifying and constantly reducing costs of production. And some of the strategies include using new technologies, reducing waste. Some of the job perks are eliminated, and using part-time or temporary workers as a way of saving money, or for that matter, outsourcing your work, since we live in more of a global economy now. And it depends on non-wage needs, such as healthcare and retirement. An American system of work is different in that workers have less power than global counterparts. Social democratic model of work is there's more job protection for full-time workers. The temptation to hire temporary workers is also there, and more resources directed towards social programs to help the poor and unemployed, such as childcare and other support models. Conclusions: market organization of work in the 21st century is a rapid change underway in rich developed countries like the United States. Market forces penetrate many areas of social life and government, and examples of increased organizational loose coupling are emerging.